Year before last, when we were going through the anniversary celebrations throughout the course of the year, I chose to touch base with these texts and in a sermon that was aimed at the corporate, that is, congregations and how we see ourselves and how we behave. But as we're coming up to Lent, and I'm going to begin a series a little early next week on the prophets, I think it's appropriate during a season of reflection that we bring this encounter of a season of reflection, thoughts of what and how we behave relative to our past. What do we do with our past as individuals? When Chris and I first were married, she learned, I think she didn't realize all that she was getting into. In fact, I know she wasn't. But one of those pieces that she inherited was that mountain storytelling piece that was always a part of our family. So when I drug her to the mountains of North Carolina and my mom and dad were still alive, stories were told about days of old and told again and again. And when I took her to, I didn't actually have to take her because they both in the area. When we spent time with my daughters from my first marriage, she listened to those stories, some of them told again. And what happened was, being the sensitive person that I'm not, I failed to realize that as those stories were being told, she wasn't in them. And as she was trying to be part of a family system that was very unlike her family system, because her family system were very different. Her dad grew up on Music Street in Scranton. And her mom grew up in Tamaqua, in a mining town. And those kind of Pennsylvania, German, East European roots, were much more reserved than those of us who grew up in those Scots-Irish, everybody's kind of drunk and tell it all. It's different. So there was that adjustment. And I had to get how hard that was for her to hear stories that involved her predecessor. Not by name, but by inference. You see, Chris had married a future. She had no idea how bad that could be either. She had married, somebody would drag her off to Texas for God's sake. She had no idea that would have happened, or I'd never talked her into marrying me. She had married a future. And what she was experiencing early in the relationship was a person who was focused on the past. Chris experienced what many people experience when they encounter people in new relationships. Now that almost 27 years of marriage and more than 27 years of relationship have occurred, the past includes conversations and stories about her, though I'm not allowed to tell most of them. She is a part of that formation, that history that has come to be so much a part of who I am. The same thing was true with Anna when she was born, and she would go to family stuff, and she was old enough, and she'd get bored quickly of hearing stories because they almost always involved stories about her sisters and never about herself, until Anna was able to make her own mark, tread her own path through our lives. And then it shifted, because that's, again, what we do. This is a part of who we are. You have already learned Sunday morning comes around, and at some point you're going to hear me talk about my lovers, my past lovers. Some of those lovers came from the great dismal swamp in northeastern North Carolina, where I pastored 3 little churches, the first churches that I actually pastored. I'd been associate prior to that. And I encountered these farm people, and I knew nothing about life for them, but I developed a respect, even though that ministry with United Methodist was very short term. There were relationships that I cherished there. And then there were my lovers in Richmond, Virginia, where there was this congregation where a few people who had O'Kelly Methodist roots, which is a part of the UCC, people who were Pennsylvanians who had come to Richmond work, who had evangelical and reform roots, some New England Congregationalists who came there, and I couldn't quite adjust to the board meetings, where the Richmonders were always feeling as if you needed to be polite. And those north of the Mason-Dixon line didn't have really any use for wasting time at board meetings being polite. And so you should be able to say if somebody is a so-and-so. And the Richmond people thought, yes, you ought to be able to if you term it in polite terms. Because that's what the Southern way is. You can cut somebody to pieces, be polite about it. All right? I learned to love all of those. All right? And then there were people of Cincinnati. And I don't tell as many stories about them because they got really, 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 really mad at me when I left, because they were like trying to kill me with all of the pastoral load that was on me. And so I was supposed to stay there and kind of take it forever. But there were good stories about certain people sitting around bowls of chili. Right, Bill and Jane? Cincinnati is a credible chili city if you didn't know that. They just fix it a little different than some other places. And then, of course, you've been prone to hear about Dallas. These were congregations and people I grew to love, and I couldn't help myself. They're a part of my past. They have formed who I am. They have formed my ministry. And now 2 years and almost 3 months here, and you have begun making your mark in my life, and now I have Cocoa Beach stories to tell other people. Good stories. My friend, the retired Baptist from Atlanta, he called me yesterday because he'd made his first official visit. He started a ministry doing end-of-life work. And he was calling to tell me about his first experience. And then it got off on you. And so he said he's reading the Facebook pages. And he couldn't believe that you people weren't dropping off quicker because you stay busy all the time. And we tell stories about that. You, who you are, what you do. And that's good. Here's the problem with all of that, is that we can get prone to think of our experiences always in terms of the past. And when we get fixated on the past, it could inhibit where we need to be going in the future. It can slow down our development. And some of you are thinking, well, come, up in my 80s, what makes you think I'm going to keep developing? You know what? Because God intends for you to. I've had couples sit in my office throughout the ages, and inevitably there'll be tensions, and they'll say, well, he changed, or she changed. This is not the person I married. And I want to say, well, for God's sake, be grateful, because they'd be dead if they hadn't changed. That's the nature of being human, is that each of us and all of us will be changing because it's a part of being alive. It's a part of creating our journey together. And so we need to consider that. One of my spiritual heroes, Carl Marney, always used that quote, and I'm sure I've used it before here, because he talked about, he framed it in this way: no hope, there's no hope for the future unless the past remains unreceived, unconfessed, and unforgiven. That we deal with that for what it is. And I would throw into there, given the words of assurance, with the dents and the dings, all a part of that history. What so happens is, though, ever so often we have to do this going through home again in order to keep moving constructively into the future. And as individuals, we do that in different ways than churches do. Churches do like homecomings and memorial Sundays and all of those markings and the holy seasons. As individuals, we do it in different ways as well. Some of us go to family reunions still. See, my grief is that I have 3 family reunions that were incredible. You talk about storytelling. Man, I tell you right now, the Crawford reunion was a sheer joy. They had a nose measuring contest. You can't find that just anywhere anymore. Right? Family reunions are one way that we mark who we are and where we're going and how our family members to whom we're connected have changed along the way. We mark it in some cases, as I do, with storytelling. Telling those stories about who we are and what our journey has been this past year. And some of us, we go through home again by revisiting the markers in our lives. Whenever I get a chance, even places that were unpleasant, I will make some effort through my journey to visit. College was not a pleasant experience for me because I had to experience so much change. And I got challenged in so many ways. And I saw the hypocrisy of a religious administration who, in the name of God, would end people's careers. And in order to satisfy the people who were paying the bills, would do awful things. But it is exactly because it was a place of pain and change in my life. Ever so often, 5 or 6 years or so, I'll go a little detour out of the way to drive through the college, which has changed so much. It was a place in my life and journey. I mark it. I remember it for what it was because it helped me get to the next place. Places where I once pastored. I remember one time Chris was blessed with having to be drug across the swamp to the 3 churches that I pastored. Just drove by. I just needed to see that they were still there. I don't know why. It was just important to me. Marking personal places, going through home again. It's what we do. So when we get to the past, we can handle it in different ways. But one of the things that you can do that people often do is they reach across the shoulder, they grab their past, they hug it, and they never let go again. That's what the first text of the morning was about. The people of Israel and the greatest liberation story told in the Hebrew Scriptures and in most other literature. And they're on their way out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of bondage. And they're going through the Red Sea, and God is delivering them because God has raised up a leader who has a vision. And as they go, they turn and they see the Egyptians bearing down on them. And what do? They cry out to Moses, "Why have you brought us here to die? We were perfectly happy being slaves in Egypt. Those were the good old days, Moses. We knew what was, even if we were being beaten by the taskmasters and having to live on almost nothing. Those were the good times, Moses. Why have you done this to us? Hanging on to the past and hugging it and never letting it go. So it's the only thing we know because the future is so frightening to us." Other people, younger people, I find, I see this in a lot of the millennials, and I think the electronic stuff has really set this on a course that's going to change generations forever. They think somehow you can amputate the past. Well, what does that have to do with me? Oh, sure. A YouTube may show up on social media. Some of our politicians are finding out how hard that is. But otherwise, what does it have to do with me? I've got my phone. I've got my iPad. I've got this. I've got Instagram. I don't need to worry about that back there because something's going to happen in the next 10 minutes. I know. That's why I'm looking at my phone. We try to amputate the past as if the past has nothing to do with the present. That's a mistake. Holding on to your past and just never changing, that's a disaster because we've all been called to follow Jesus somewhere. Amputating your past and pretending it's not a part of who you are, that's not very constructive, nor is it very helpful. And here's where we come to what Jesus was trying to say to those who would listen. Look, you can't grab a new piece, a patch, and put it on an old garment and think that that's going to work forever, because it won't. You're mixing two things that will not, in the long haul, sustain itself. Nor can you take new wine that's still fermenting and put it in old wineskins, because all that effervescence, all that fermentation, those old wineskins just can't take. Jesus wasn't saying that the wine of old was bad. Anybody knows a little aged wine doesn't do anybody any harm. Jesus wasn't saying, pour it all out because you need to make new wine. Don't be absurd. But what Jesus was saying is, you need to pay attention that the law has some significance in the cultic community as we tell about the past, but the future has to do with something new, something effervescent, something that's going to happen, and you can't put it in those old modes, and you can't put it in those old models that you think define who you are. The day I draw my final breath, and I hope it's not, this afternoon. A couple of things I'd like to do. The day I draw my final breath, I want to be able to still have something that I'm hungering for, that I'm thirsting for. I still want to be alive, and in being alive, created in the image of God, trying to look for the what's next. I don't want to be there on the deathbed, and as I'm getting ready to draw the last breath, simply be able to say, well, that was pretty good, I guess. And start recounting everything that's happened in the past. Because we have been created in the image of God, and we are in process from the day, they don't smack people on the bottom anymore, but I got smacked on the bottom, I'm sure. You smacked on the bottom and let out that first cry, and you begin breathing, and from that time forward, you are changing. Some of those changes I don't like. I don't like the fact that when I get up in the morning, I usually have some new ache and pain. I don't like that. But I like that when I get up in the morning and I get to the office or wherever, somebody will show up that may teach me something that I didn't know or something I've already forgotten. I like the fact that if I'm out hiking somewhere, I may see something I've never seen before that's so much a part of God's wonderful creation. New and exciting. Yeah, it may be happening every day out there, but I saw it. It changed me. It enriched me. I want to stay open to that. I want to stay open to the possibilities that even though when I have conversations with my sister who's still living, I have to spend most of the conversations listening about her animals rather than having a conversation about how we're doing. I want to be able to have a conversation to find out really how she's doing, and I don't really care how the dog's doing today. No offense for those of you who have animals. We have animals too, okay? But you know what I'm saying? Conversations about life and relationship. I want to have that happen. I want that to morph into something more. And for those old friends of mine, I don't have to worry about, because usually they're the ones who's kicking my behind, prodding me to get onward, to read some new book, to offer something they've learned, to point in a new direction. I want to go there because that's the excitement of life. So the past is not bad. Jesus never said it was. Jesus was a Jew. He'd know better than that. The past has been a formative place for us. This moment, being mindful of each other, is a wonderful place to be. But staying open to the future, God, that's so incredible. Jesus looked at the disciples. I had an Episcopal friend, by the way, a few weeks ago. We had the parable about, Jesus called them and they caught all these fish. And so they took the boats that the archaeologists have found about Jesus' time. So he figured the cubic feet, and he figured the fish was probably tilapia and what it would go in today's market. And he figured that these disciples walked away from about $500,000 with both boats. I don't care about that. I don't even care if I have tilapia tomorrow. All I care about is that Jesus has said to come and follow. Didn't say to end it, to shut it down. Didn't say to look back. Didn't say to stare at my navel. Just said come and follow. Because life, there's a lot to experience. How about you? Are you going through home again? Are you eager to what's going to happen this afternoon? Are you looking forward to tomorrow morning? Well, those of you that may have to go back, our wins may not be. But otherwise, the discovery of life and the mysteries of God. May God help us always to be on that journey in our lives, claiming that promise, experiencing grace, warmth, touch, and that we may see in all things the holy. For that's the way God's made things to be.